Actually, I had a question. I watched your last BDO guide video. Okay. And it referenced things you've been preaching for a long time about making money. Specifically, there's this particular strategy. I can't remember which one, though. Where in your videos should I start as a beginner with your strategies? Really good question. So my guides are probably broken up well into like 4 different categories. If you want the very first stumblings of how I figured things out, you watch the Money Mastery series. You can get there with !money. These are things I made within a couple months of the game, and it just shows my thinking figuring out the systems. It also gives you a good introduction to many systems, which are fine. They're not profound. Most of them are outdated in their thinking, but ultimately the methods still make money, which is kind of weird. I think I said that backwards, though. But either way, you get the point. After the Money Mastery series, there's the Bum to Billionaire series. Now, I've continued the 5 strategies of income or whatever in those coaching sessions. There's 12 episodes. They're an hour each. They're made in 2016, 17. There you get a complete guide of basically how to build wealth in the video game Black Desert Online from a lot of people's perspectives, goals, and challenges. I gotta see what these people need. And that's good because that's going to give you basically what you need. Now, from there, 3 years went by of very specific things. I have the best investing guide probably anybody has made in that game. ! Economics. That is the most fundamental, correct way of thinking about supply and demand and the rate of commodities and inflation that I've ever seen. And I'd love to see someone top it. It's definitely possible that they could. But for right now, that's the best if you want to be an investor. So you got to watch that. That's great. And then throughout the few years, there's very specific, like, here's how you master farming, or this is how you do specific tasks. Then the last stage was the Blade Edge. The Blade Edge, I think, was 17 videos. It was like the Bum to Billionaire series, but I wanted to modernize it for this year. And I take players from PC and Xbox, maybe PS4. I don't think so. Maybe. And we go console and PC, multiple servers, and we hone in on the same kind of thing. But now we have a 4-year refined strategy talking about certain people's instances. And since there's 17 episodes, a lot of them are under 20 minutes, and they're very core to a specific task. So if you watch the Blade Edge, you're going to be fine with overall strategies and instances. And if you want more, it's all in there in the history of the guides. You should do a stream specifically to discuss your plans and thoughts about that journey to be a millionaire. I'd 100% be there. All right, let's do it. Right now. All right, guys. So this is my plan to be a millionaire. Are you ready? Right now, I have less than $0 net worth, unfortunately, with outstanding debts and having very low income for years. What I'm going to do is stop thinking I'm a freaking genius and put my ego aside and submit myself to a plan that has worked for millions of Americans, and listen to Dave Ramsey, who has gotten more people out of debt than anyone on the face of this earth. His plan is very simple. There's 7 steps to it. The first baby step 1, save $1,000. That way, if there's a major emergency, if my PC dies, there's something that prevents me from going back into debt immediately. I've been able to do that, and I've had that step locked away, which is fantastic, even though my income is quite low. I've been able to save that. Then there's baby step 2, which is compile all of your debts. This was very depressing and not fun, and took me a long time. And there's like 40 different outstanding things. Some are nickel and dime, some are quite large, and that's going to take a while. And the average person basically pays those down by selling everything that they can and trying to earn more income and working harder and spending less and sticking to a budget in 2 years. Which I expect that sounds about right. It may take me a little bit longer, maybe a little bit less. We don't know. But that's average. The only way that works is if I can get control of my income. My income minus my expenses gives me that margin to pay down those debts and then eventually build wealth. So you need to have self-control over your own expenses. If you don't tell your money where to go at the beginning of every month, you end up wondering where it went. And that was me, for sure. And I stopped that in January Wreckage, one of our mods, helped me build a spreadsheet, and I mapped out every dollar. But now I literally use the app and the website, everydollar.com, which is Dave Ramsey's thing. So I'm going to budget for the rest of my life. And then as long as my expenses keep getting pushed down to nothing, I keep expanding my income, that margin, that difference, that is what I have left over. That goes to pay down debt. Years later, when I'm out of that, then it's baby step 3, which is figure out living expenses for 6 months, 3 to 6 months. Since I'm single, it would be 6 months. Then I'll basically build a cushion. I'll take all of that I was paying down debt, and that's simply going to grow however long that takes, probably 10 months or something. And then we have a fully funded emergency fund. That is thousands of dollars. That is, you lose your job, you have no income. That is pandemic hits. That is the car blows up. That is medical expense, whatever. And that becomes this cushion that allows you to basically not go back into debt, right? So at baby step 3, once that's completed, you're out of debt, which means you don't have these car payments. You don't have these student loans. They're all gone. It's great. You don't have payments. Instead, you have just money left over. And then you use that to build a huge 3 to 6 month emergency fund. So that prevents you from going back into debt. And then step 4, 5, 6, and 7 get done simultaneously. And that's where you begin investing 15% of your income in growth mutual funds or S&P MIR ETFs, things like that. Things that are invested in the American industry. And over time, this money grows quite profoundly. If somebody gets rid of their car payment, the average car payment is $495. If someone gets rid of that car payment and doesn't lease a depreciating asset, but instead puts that into a mutual fund index or a mutual fund, from age 25 to 65, they have over $4 million. We're all going to retire. It's just something that inevitably happens to us. So we need to figure out, okay, by the time that comes, would I rather have millions of dollars, or did I really like the car that much that I can now live on Social Security if that even comes around? So I just fully intend to keep on working as hard as I can my whole life. Whether it's streaming or whatever it is, probably streaming and other things, we'll just see how it all goes. I get bored and distracted pretty easily, and then I find new things that are interesting. And streaming's nice because I can just bring you along with my passions. So guess what? When you have no payments, when you don't have to go in debt where you're going to owe anybody anything because you have your own self-insured large cushion, and you start chucking away 15% into investments, you can get that $500 a month, and you can even get more. And anyway, also, this is pretty important, from step 1 to step 7, I believe in charity and giving away at least 10%. That's important. And Dave Ramsey talks about that as being a big thing in his plan. It's something that I always thought was really important as well. So what we have here is step 4. Now 5 ends up being save for your kids' eventual student loans. I'm not married, I don't have any kids. And then I think somewhere in there, I'm on baby step 2, so I can refine the later ones once I'm there. But another one is paying down your house. So you can eventually own your own house. When you don't have a mortgage payment, I've owned houses. Let me tell you, the mortgage payment's a big chunk. It's a huge chunk. When you don't have a mortgage payment, when you don't have student loans, when you don't have credit card bills, when you don't have a lease on a car, you have income. You have huge income. As long as you're budgeting every month, your expenses are minor, your income is quite significant because you can actually use your own resource. You're not there saying, I worked for 40 years, I spent 10 years in school, I've got my degrees, I make $85 a year, but it all has somebody else's name on it. As soon as I get a check, I have to write checks, and at the end I have nothing. You don't have to live like that anymore. Instead, you can start paying yourself first through these investments that you don't touch, and that's the road to wealth. And you can actually live like no one else, and you can give like no one else. And that's the plan. And it's available to everyone. You only need discipline. You only need to say, I will not consume, I will not devour 100% of the resources that I get. I will save a small amount of them for my future. This is the Dave Ramsey plan. So my ego is set aside because I always have the tendency to think I'm a freaking genius. I had 2,000 Bitcoins. I got rid of them before they were $1 each. I owned an automobile leasing company for a very short time in order to save $2,000 on taxes. There's a book on my shelf about how I invested in real estate when I was 23 years old and was this wonderkind. I love to do things my own way, and my way has gotten me below zero. So I'm done with that. I'm going to use the very standard, practical way. Success leaves clues. It's done for me by millions of Americans from Dave Ramsey. And I'm using his plan. And it's going to work because his plan works. And it's just like how I always teach people how to make money in Black Desert. And they never want to listen to me. They always want to do their own thing. But I always hear the same thing over and over and over again from thousands and tens of thousands of players. The systems work. If they work it, it'll work for them. That's how I'm going to live my life. It's available to all of us. That's the Dave Ramsey plan. From -0 to one day probably a millionaire. You can check in with me 40 years to see how it went.